Hey there, folks. Welcome to the edition of Stranger in a Southern Land. I, of course, am your host, Jake Manning. Today on the program, well, you should know, it's part 2 with Humpy Wheeler. I can't tell you how happy I am that we've gotten to this part of the interview. This is, I like part 1. Part 1 gives you a good background and good history, but this is where things get really cool and pretty emotional, too. We start off this part 2, this conversation that I have with Humpy Wheeler, we start off this part with a conversation about Dale Ernhardt and how that kind of changed the safety of the sport and actually changed the whole landscape of the idea of a NASCAR driver as well. And, you know, Humpy pulls no punches about how he feels about the way the sport is today and his feelings towards what happened with Dale on that fateful day where he had the crash that ended his life, and it gets pretty emotional and stuff like that during this part. And you know, it's amazing to me, and I hope I did a good job in fairness and representing, because I don't know a lot about NASCAR and stuff like that, but I know this was a big deal. I remember seeing it on TV, but like Humpy was there. He had to talk to the family the next day. So it's emotional on that level too, but it also, there's a lot of insight into like how that changed the sport. Also, there's a lot of insight on a lot of other things and, you know, opinions about where he sees the sport in the future. Like, that's the thing that amazed me so much about Humpy, and that's why I'm so glad that I was able to do a 2-parter with this guy. Like, you know, Humpy, he's kind of done an entire career. He could sit in his very nice home, which you see in the background of the video portion. He's got a very great home right on a lake, and he could just retire and just enjoy the rest of his life. But no, he still wonders. He's still curious about things. He was talking about like how racing's gonna be in 50 years from now. Like, the idea that he is still curious, still thinking, still wondering how the sport can be manipulated, turned and twisted, made better, you know, what, you know, pitfalls can be avoided and stuff like that. Just that type of verve, that type of, you know, veracity for knowledge is just contagious for me. I was just so happy to sit down and talk with him, and we cover all kinds of weird angles and stuff like that, especially to have a nice conversation about the XFL that Vince McMahon run. So I highly recommend, especially I know a lot of my fans are wrestling fans and probably watched an XFL game or two. I highly encourage you to listen to the part where Humpy talks about the XFL and what his suggestions were for it. So anyways, I cannot wait to get into this conversation, part 2 of this conversation with Humpy Wheeler. But before I get there, I want to give a big thank you to the Shining Wizards Network for everything that they do to get this podcast out to as many ears and eyeballs as possible, and earbuds as possible, that is. So thank you for that, and make sure you check them out at shiningwizardsnetwork.com. Also, too, big thank you to my producer, Don at DSCT.TV. Thank him for everything that he does. So thank you, Don. I appreciate it. Also, too, guys, I got some dates. Like I said, Humpy's a promoter. He's pushing me. He inspires me forward to make sure that I promote myself as well. So if you are getting this podcast in a timely fashion, I hope you are, because you have more than enough time to make it down to the evening news this Wednesday, September 7th, for the All Organic Open Mic, which I am hosting. And featured guest is Ian Aber, Atlanta-based comedian Ian Aber. Right now, I was just checking my Facebook and my Twitter, and he is tearing it up down there in Atlanta, and he's going to be just coming off kind of a little tour and stuff like that. So very excited for him to show up in Charlotte Wednesday, September 7th at the Evening Muse. For more information about that show, make sure you log on to eveningmuse.com. Now, also, too, this Friday and Saturday, I will be emceeing at Bonkers at the Executive Park Hilton, just off of 77 South. So make sure you show up there. For more information about that show, make sure you log on to Bonkers Comedy Productions. Bonkers with a Z, because they're bonkers. Now, next week, Monstrous Comedy, like I said, big month for them, and this is probably the crown jewel of them all. On Thursday, September 15th, Monstrous Comedy presents The Roast of Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. Now, I don't think that Donald or Hillary will be there, literally, but maybe figuratively they will be there, that is for sure, and some very funny comedians and stuff like that, and we'll be making a lot of jokes about our current political process right now. I highly encourage you to show up to that, and that will be happening at Petra's in the Plaza Midwood area. So make sure you log on to Monstrous Comedy on Facebook.com. Now, also that weekend, big weekend for professional wrestling, and it kicks off on Friday in Gibsonville on September 16th for Queens of Combat. That is a night show, and they will also be running a Saturday afternoon matinee show, I believe at about 4 o'clock in Gastonia on September 17th. And the reason why Queens of Combat will be running the afternoon show, because the night show will be taken over by PWX, also in the Gastonia Armory. It's going to be a double shot. I think you pay one ticket price, you get both shows. So for more information about that, make sure you log on to queensofcombat.com and pwxpro.com. And then that Sunday, I know there's a Panthers game at 1 o'clock, but don't worry. I've got a wrestling show for you in Albemarle, North Carolina at 6 p.m. run by my good buddy Freight Train, the guy that I made the documentary about, the power of the Freight Train. $5 wrestling superstar Freight Train, that is, and good friend of mine. We'll be running a wrestling show in Albemarle, North Carolina at 6 p.m. For more information about that show, just follow me on social media. I'm tweeting out the poster constantly right now to get as many people out to that as possible. And I am very active on social media and very easy to get a hold of. I am available on Twitter at ManScoutManning or on Instagram at ManScoutManning. If you have a question about the podcast, or if you want to become a sponsor of this podcast, make sure you email me at jake@sslshow.com. Or if you want to book me for an upcoming wrestling event, make sure you email me at manscoutmanning@yahoo.com. Anyways, you guys have been waiting a whole week for this part 2, and now I've made you wait for this entire intro for me to get all this information out to you, but you can wait no longer. Here it is, part 2 of my conversation with Humpy Wheeler, here on Stranger in the Southern Land. But, you're just talking about racing now. You talk about safety restrictions, talk about updating the cars and safety and stuff like that. And then literally like 15 minutes ago, we were talking about how people were intentionally putting things on their car to hurt people and then just how dangerous it was. When did that change happen where things just changed like that? The idea of safety of drivers, the idea of regulations, the idea of like how these cars perform. When did that change happen? Was there a particular moment? Was it over time? What was it?
I think it probably was right around the time that Dale Ernhardt was killed in 2002. I never forget that day. I'm down in Daytona. I flew down there with a friend of mine, and I went by and saw Earnhardt, and he and I were extremely close friends. And he used to pinch you, on your side. And he pinched me real hard. And I said, and that's all. I mean, that just said, hello, how you doing, yakety yak. And I said, well, car running all right, yeah. He said, I had a chance to win the race today, I think. And because no race driver ever says, I'm going to win the race today. I mean, they might in Hollywood, but there's just too many things that can happen, Mm-hmm. And
it's like a comedian saying, I'm going to have a good set tonight. Like, I might make him laugh.
Yeah, that's right, yeah. I'm going to break his head. But we left about halfway because we were down there in a friend's plane and get back to Charlotte. We landed, and it was we got there just as a big wreck happened. Well, it wasn't Earnhardt's wreck, it was Tony Stewart. Tony Stewart had a terrible wreck on the backstretch, and we were all concentrating on, is he okay? Because wrecks at Daytona can often lead to lethal consequences. And so once we found out that he was all right, they hadn't restarted the race again. And the restart is when Earnhardt got killed. So there's only a couple laps to go, so I went out, went on a jog, and here comes my wife, Pat, and she sees me, and she tells me to come over, and I know it's something bad. And she said, Dale's dead. And up to that point, it was, they'd been mummed about it. So it was a shock to me, because the Ernhardts and I had gone back years and years, and his dad was one of my best friends, and I'd always kind of promised his dad I'd take care of Junior, even though he wasn't a junior. We call Dale Junior now, but Dale Senior was kind of Ralph's junior. And so Ralph had died several years before that from a heart attack in the kitchen. And so Dale, the idea of him dying is just almost impossible. I have seen him go through some wrecks that you just can't go through and live through, and he did. Particularly one recently in Talladega, where he was rolling down the road at Talladega, the front stretch, and the car starts flipping, and Kenny Schrader, one of his best buddies, is aiming right at him. And we always wondered if these tops could take a hit. If you ever got hit in the top, would you die? Mm-hmm. Well, he got hit in the top. And because of the sloppy way he held his head, he kind of leaned his head over this way, which is, you wouldn't let a young driver do that for anything. He got through it and lived through it and was okay. And but this one, everybody on pit, happened right in front of pit road. Everybody thought the guy's got to be dead, because you can't take a shot in the top. I had never seen a shot in the top in a major NASCAR race. Well, about 10 minutes later, he comes out of the car. And what saved him was the angle of his head when the car was upside down. Now, he broke his sternum, which that and the femur are the toughest bones in your body. And, got back to the hospital and walked into the hospital on 2 feet. That's how tough the guy was. And so I called him the next day, and he said, "Oh, the pain's just terrible," and yakety yak. And I said, "Well, who are you going to get to run Watkins Glen?" "Me." He said he was going to run Watkins Glen after a wreck like that. That's how tough he was, and he did. He didn't do any good, but he ran the race. So that bothered me. But what bothered me more than anything else was Neil Bonnet, his best friend, his deer hunting buddy, and a guy that my daughter Patty, who's a TV producer, got into the TV booth and did pretty darn well. Good old boy announcer from Alabama. Talked like the rest of them, but was smart and had a perception. And he loses it. He decides to make a comeback. He loses it down at Daytona in practice, coming off the 4th turn. Tries to save the car. Can't do that. He goes back up the racetrack and hits the car at a 25-degree angle. Killed instantly. Going back and looking at Earnhardt's accident, it's almost identical to the one that his best friend Neil Bonnet had. Loses the car, tries to save it, goes back, hits the wall at a 25-degree angle, almost in the same place. And both of them were killed. And both of them were killed by the unfortunate part that was killing drivers at the time was the basal skull fracture. The the basal skull fracture is one that kills most highway drivers. You hit something, the head snaps forward, and then it goes as far as it can, and then it's thrown back hard, and those two bottom vertebrae in your neck crack, and that's it. You're dead. To help people when they're on the highway, if you come across a wreck and you see blood coming out the ears, chances are pretty close, pretty much that the driver's had a basal skull fracture and he's dead. That's the telltale sign. And if it didn't, then hopefully he'll or she'll make it. But I went home. I mean, when I got home, I called down there and I tried to call Dale Jr. and I couldn't get him on the phone. I tried to call Teresa. I couldn't get her on the phone. But I finally got Mike Elton, the guy that runs NASCAR, and he said, well, yeah, he told me a little bit. And then I got the general manager of Ernhardt Enterprises, Ty Norris, and he said, we're having a meeting at 8:30 tomorrow morning. We're going to fly back. And we'd like for you to sit in on it. And I said, okay. And so I got up there and it was weird. Here it is the next day. People are already coming in by the droves. Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Ohio, etc. Of course, they were coming back from the race. And they were taking flowers and leaving them there. And so I went into the Earnhardt deal and place, and they were getting ready to start the meeting, and there was Dale Jr. sitting there and the rest of them. And I couldn't believe Dale Jr. had the fortitude and the responsibility to even be there. And but he was. And so the rest of the day was very surreal. Teresa called me and she wanted to know if I could go to Lutheran Cemetery in Kannapolis and see if we could bury Dale there. And I said, we can't do that. I said, that'd be like that little cemetery in, I guess, Indiana, where they buried James Dean. They just tore it up. And I said, what I'd do is just bury it on the farm. And I said, you can do that legally in North Carolina. So that's where they ended up doing it, in a secret place back there. And so of all the things that happened in racing, I think that that probably had as much of a negative impact as anything that we've ever had, because 50% of the people loved him and 50% of them didn't. Mm-hmm. You know, but all of a sudden now everybody likes him, you know. And so it was a bad day at Black Rock, and quite frankly, stock car racing has never been the same since then, because usually when a driver retires or gets killed, there's another driver that comes along and takes his place. In this case, there wasn't, because he was the working man's driver. He was the backhoe operator's hero. He was the shrimp boat captain's hero, etc. Well, there was no other driver like him. You know, Carl Edwards, he was a body man up in Kansas. He didn't step forward and become the working man's driver. Neither did Clint Boyer, who was a similar background. So they just bypassed him completely. Now the fans liked Earnhardt Jr., but he's the boy next door. No comparison. So there was no one there to take his place. Like when Richard Petty retired, all his fans went over to Bill Elliott. And Bill Elliott was the most popular driver in NASCAR for years on account of that. But it didn't happen with Earnhardt, and that was a tough deal because it never, nobody ever picked that popularity up.
Well, and it almost seems like, because yeah, a lot of things have changed as far as safety and everything that goes with NASCAR. But obviously, someone like Dale was, me not being a huge, NASCAR fan, I know who he is. You know what I'm saying? Did it take someone like him to have a crash like that to people really realize something needs to be done and things need to get better safety-wise?
Well, I think it did. We had lost Adam Petty and other drivers, and I think that well, I never thought I'd ever see a race driver, a stock NASCAR driver, make the cover of Time magazine. He did. The publicity off of this was unbelievable. And so it brought about, and we had this Hans device sitting around the whole time. It's just a lot of drivers didn't think it was comfortable. They hadn't used it a lot. And when we had an ARCA race at Charlotte, kind of a minor league super speedway deal, on the last lap, Kerry Earnhardt, Dale's son, and Blake Alexander, a fine young driver from Pennsylvania, were coming down the front straightaway fighting for the lead. And they got all tangled up, and Brett went down on the inside of the track, came back up and hit the wall at a 25-degree angle at about a wall speed of about 130 miles an hour. And he's dead instantly. So I went to NASCAR. I said, you guys got to do something now. I said, it's got to be done. And even though it was ARCA, but ARCA and NASCAR are very close together. And so they did. They mandated it, the Hans device then, and it saved a lot of lives. No question about that. Now, what's going to happen after that? Because racing has always gone in cycles as far as danger is concerned. It gets real calm and flat, and everybody gets complacent, and then the cars start going faster, or something happens, and then boom, 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 you start losing guys. And then people come up with an idea of how to solve things, and it comes back down again. Now, what's going to happen to put that thing into being again? We're starting to hurt a bunch of race drivers. I don't know. It may not be death. It may be injury. But certainly injury can be almost as bad as death. And so we've had a number of hits and where guys have gotten hurt pretty bad and all that kind of stuff. But we haven't had the ration of death that we had back in the 90s, or certainly not in the most bloody period we ever had from 64 to 70. But you never know, and you have to watch out for it because it will show up. And then you think about, okay, what's the people's attitude toward it? I hate to say this. I guess somebody should. I think there's a certain element of the public that like to see people get hurt. I think it's a small one. I think there's a bigger percentage that like to see guys get hurt and escape it. You know, the biggest roar I ever saw in my life at a racetrack was Fireball Roberts lost it coming out of, blew a tire coming into the fourth turn in Smokey Yunick's car, slammed hard into the wall, spun around twice, ended up perpendicular to the wall, and a guy named Johnny Dollar, whose real name we'll not know, he comes down and he slams right into never. I don't think he ever hit the brake, and slammed right into Fireball, but fortunately it was on the passenger side. The hit was so hard it pushed the passenger door all the way into where the driver's hip was. That's how bad it was. Gosh. Well, it looked like death warmed over. And so Smokey, who never paid any attention to any rule anybody ever had about anything, he runs across the racetrack, and it's his driver. And so he's in there doing something, we're not sure what, not in the car, but his head's sticking in there. And about 5 minutes, the whole grandstand stopped, just completely quiet, because here's the Dale Earnhardt of his time, Fireball Roberts. And so about 5 minutes later, Fireball gets out of the car, and it's just a deafening roar that the guy made it, you know, and really got it. About 2 years later, I'm sitting down in Smokey's shop, and I'm sitting on top of a box, and it's got a kind of a old quilt over top of it. And I said, "What'd you do to that car Fireball wrecked so bad at Charlotte?" He says, "You're sitting on it." He had it cubed, and it was sitting. I was sitting on the car, and I said, of course, Fireball was dead by then, but I said, "Did Fireball ever come back and sit on that thing?" He said, "Hell no." And so, but there was a great character we lost, Smokey. And no one like him, never was. He should have been in the Hall of Fame. First out, best mechanic we ever had, period. No one was better than Smokey Yunick.
You talk about all these characters. You got Fireball and Smokey and all these early. And now you made mention of, like, you're like, oh, this guy was a good spokesperson. Just the drivers themselves have changed over the years. When do you think that noticeable change happened? We talked about the change in safety, but when did it come to the point that
it's hurt us badly? It's gotten too fancy. That's what's happened with racing today. It's gotten too fancy. Drivers are in three-piece suits, and they all talk right. They don't have they've lost the mountain twang where they came from. They drive Ferraris if they could, except their manufacturer would kill them. They all married girls with long blonde hair, for the most part. Not saying anything wrong with that. They've done a pretty good job of marrying the right girl, but they're just too Hollywood. Mm-hmm. And that's the last thing we had in the generation before that. I mean,
do you feel like that's pressure though from like just NASCAR? Like, hey, we need to be out to be a further brand, or is it just the drivers themselves as individuals?
No, it's just the drivers themselves. NASCAR would like for us to have drivers like we used to have. Mm-hmm. But between the sponsors and the necessity of having these clean-cut Hollywood guys, that's just what they've become. and it's turned the public off.
Do you feel like that's something that's gonna change? Like you said, obviously safety corrects itself. Do you feel like that will correct itself?
It may. I had a guy call me last year, and he said, I'm looking for a guy that's got ringlets from his ears down to his toes, got tattoos everywhere, just a complete renegade, like you see on the motorcycle circuit. And he said, if I can find a guy like that, I'll put him in a race car. And I'm starting to think, wow, what a. But you couldn't just invent a guy. I couldn't go get somebody like James Buescher or some cat that's running the Xfinity circuit or whatever it is, and make a crazy nomad type driver out of it. He's got to be that way.
He's got to be a guy with tattoos, beard,
the whole thing.
Yeah.
Well, and I looked at these motorcycle flippers, and they're just not the type that would make good stock car drivers. You know, their act is about 37 seconds long, and they're not gonna last long out there on the circuit. So I do think that, well, if you take the reason Earnhardt could get away for so many things is because he was representing Jim Goodrich. And Jim Goodrich at that time's biggest problem was counterfeit parts from the Pacific Rim. You go wreck your Chevy truck, and you go in the body shop, get in there, and the guy gives you an estimate of $7,000, and he can save half of that by going to the Far East and getting an inferior body part. And so they like the real thing, because if you remember the commercial they made for Earnhardt, he's banging cars all around Martinsville. Mm-hmm. And they wanted to show that it was a tough deal. So maybe as different and more aggressive products come along, we'll have different, more aggressive types of drivers. And we have a dwarf racing now, who's a heck of a racer, Abreu, and it's going to be interesting to see if anybody picks him up. Now they will on the midgets, because that's okay, but is some Colgate or some big, huge mega sponsor going to pick him up to run cup racing? I don't know. Mm-hmm. He certainly would make an interesting addition to our race field.
Yeah, and like I said, it's like these guys, they become like their own brand. They have to manage their Instagram accounts, their Facebook accounts, and all these other things and stuff like that. And you were around in the era of like promoting when you were dropping flyers into a town. Like,
oh yeah. Today they sue you for doing that. But where all this stuff is going is pretty simple, in my opinion. There's two big companies in racing. Well, there's three. There's Speedway Motorsports. That's the company I used to run. And Bruton Smith had the majority of the stock. There's an International Speedway company, which is owned by the France family, controlling interest by the France family. They don't own it. These are public companies. And then there's Dover Downs, which is a smaller company, public. There's only one track, one major track in the U.S. that is owned by individuals, and that's the Mattioli family, and it's tied up in a grandfather trust up in Pennsylvania. Then there are these, and we used to have the best tracks in the world. Charlotte at one time was the Taj Mahal. Then Dallas, Texas came along, and it became that. Now Daytona spent $100 million, and then all of a sudden it's beyond. But they aren't the best tracks by any stretch of the imagination anymore. The best tracks in the world are overseas. They're in Abu Dhabi, $400 million. They're in China, Peking. They're in these places where they pump oil regularly, and they've been able to build fabulous tracks. Now, sooner or later, the families that control the companies that are in the U.S. are going to they're going to get tired of racing, and they're going to sell them. Media companies are going to buy them. Big media companies, Time Warner, Fox, etc., or companies we don't even hear about that can pool huge sums of money. People don't realize, when we went public with Speedway Motorsports, I had to do most of that work. A guy named Bill Brooks and I. And there is so much money pouring into the major money market capitals like Edinburgh, Paris, Milan, New York, etc. And these people want a place to put it. They want to park it somewhere where it'll grow. And they want new things. And everybody can't buy the stock that cures cancer. There's all kind of weird things that people have made money with, as you know. So what's going to happen is they're going to buy racing. And the companies that will control racing will be the mega investor companies that are geared toward entertainment. Okay? Well, if you look at entertainment versus sport, there's a little difference. Sport, and I'm talking about all sport, we'll slog along, and the baseball player will scratch himself and doodle on the plate, and time creeps on, and all of a sudden it's a 3.5 hour dull baseball game. That ain't going to happen when these companies take over. Baseball will be speeded up so fast you can't see straight, because we don't live in that time anymore, where people had a lot of time. Racing is going to be speeded up real fast, because the big crack we got against racing is that lull period. It's a 500-mile race. You start the race. First 50 miles are exciting. Then everybody goes to sleep until 50 miles before the end of the race. And then it opens up again. And the only thing that gets people going is a wreck or something like that during that lull period. I see racing going to heat races, to consolations, to B mains, kind of like the Saturday night races, and then a main event maybe of 100 miles, where the winner gets $1 million, and no big huge worry about pit stops making or breaking the car. Yeah, we'll have pit stops, but it won't determine whether a race is won or lost. It'll be a different sport, and it will be much more lively, and it'll be much more like the things that we see at Saturday night racetracks, where and then there's going to be an extremism type of racing, where you've got like the Robbie Gordon stuff, where you've got rallycross, where half the track's dirt and half's asphalt, and the cars are banging each other around, and it's going to get pretty crazy. And the cars go way up in the air, and they flip and crash and all that kind of stuff. And I wouldn't even go as far as to say the day will come when we will have monster truck racing, actual racing, not just jumping over things, but it can be done. I've already helped lay the course out so nobody gets killed doing it. So we're going to see a vast change in racing in the next 50 years as this new money comes in.
Do you think that's good? Do you think that's a good thing for the sport to evolve that far past its original model?
Well, you say, okay, we're sitting there in Springfield, Connecticut, and James Naismith's put that peach basket up, and he's got a ball. I never did figure out whether that ball he had was a soccer ball or just a ball, but he was shooting a ball in that basket.
Yeah.
Was that fun? Well, at the time, nobody thought it was much fun.
Mm-hmm.
But then that evolved into a net that swished. You got people like Kobe Bryant that could hit one from 47 feet. And all of a sudden it became a heck of a game. Golf. Golf was a lousy damn game to televise until 1955. And a guy named Frank Cherkinian said, you guys are going about it different. What we need to do is do the last 3 holes. Let's just forget everything else. Let's do the last 3 holes. And he put the concentration on the last 3 holes of the Masters, and it took off. Now, we still have a lot of different things in golf, but it still centers around the last 3 holes. And so you got you got innovative people around sports, and they're going to innovate sport. Now, some of it will be good, like you say. Some of it won't.
Mm-hmm. But gosh, I had a train of thought, but yeah.
The other thing is we're going to have new sport. If you brought somebody back from 125 years ago
Mm-hmm.
and showed him sport today, it'd be pretty crazy. My dad played left guard on the Red Grange, Illinois team at Illinois, one of the greatest college football teams ever.
Mm-hmm.
Good Lord, if he saw football today, he wouldn't, I mean, he was a coach after that to boot. He would, number one, know how to coach it, and number two, even how to play it, because the rules are so crazy.
And the athletes are different. You have larger athletes moving faster.
Yes.
It's evolving at such a
Right.
space, which I'm sure is the issue with cars.
Right.
Technology is getting better. People are getting smarter.
Exactly.
And things are just changing in that direction.
Yeah.
But what fascinates me specifically about you is that you're thinking about how the sport's going to be in 50 years from now. you live in a nice home. You've done a lot for the sport, and you could just sit back and be like, that's something I did. I've done a lot of things. But the fact that you actively ponder, that your mind is still actively thinking, where's this going to be? And that your mind is always, that fascinates me. Where do you think that drive of curiosity comes from with you?
Well, I always thought if I look at a lamp, I say, how can you make that lamp better? Not that I'm a guy that could do that, but I think the sport, if we take baseball. Now, I played baseball. I played catcher. You look at that and you say, okay, we can improve baseball because there's too much time evolving what happens at the plate. You know, the batter's got to scratch himself 100 times. The catcher's got to flip his thing. The pitcher's got to say no 4 times on the ball he's going to throw, and that all consumes too much time. What if you put a rule in and say, from the time the pitcher gets the ball in his hand, he has 12 seconds to throw it. He can't take 13 or 14. And that batter better be ready, because if he's not ready and he throws one right down the middle, it's a strike. Mm-hmm. And he can't be out there scratching his head while it's coming down through there. That would speed the game up dramatically. Would it cause the fans to be more interested in it? I think it would. I think there's too much time in between. It's just like, look what happened to golf when the PGA finally put their foot down and said, you guys are going to start putting when you get on the green. We don't want you to bring Carmichael Surveying, an instrument company, to come in and align that put up like happened sometime back in the 60s. And it just drove people crazy. Mm-hmm. As soon as they started, and let me tell you, when those guys don't do it fast, there's somebody in the locker room that will chew them out. I don't care who they are, Rory McIlroy or anybody else. Boy, speed the game up, or you're going to ruin us. Or you get fined. So, those are things that help sports. You don't see them. They're kind of behind the scenes. It's just like it's like 2 of my favorite sports, boxing and wrestling. They totally and completely depend on personalities. Without personalities, neither one of them. Boxing's biggest problem right now is where are the personalities. Ali's not around. Floyd Mayweather's out there floating somewhere, and so where's Rocky Marciano, Jack Dempsey, all those people? You got to have those people to get things going. Now, are you going to run out of personalities? You could, but then again, you can't, because there's just too. The U.S. has too many, or the world has too many things. You wonder, like the Klitschko's. Good gosh, how could you get better boxers than the Klitschko's? Look at the long reign they had. Mm-hmm. They were not popular in the U.S. Why? Well, number one, they didn't have a lot of their fights in the U.S. Number two, they were terrible interviewers. And so that just it drifted into oblivion. And like I say, Floyd Mayweather was there, but he was in the lesser divisions. People want heavyweights, and you look at the wrestlers. You look at the great wrestlers that we've had that got people all steamed up. You had the French Angel, the ugliest man in the world. You had Gorgeous George. You had the Scott brothers. You had people that just really, really got the American public inflamed, one way or the other. You gotta keep that going, and you gotta search for those people, and then see, this is what people don't do today. You can make a personality out of a personality if you would spend enough time working on it. People don't tend to do that, but you can. It's just like the movie Rocky. Why was it so popular? Because here was a guy that was down in the dumps, and he was through with life and everything else like that, and he comes back and he wins the world championship. Is that possible today? It absolutely is possible. You just have to give him the media coverage to do it.
Yeah, and I think the interesting that you bring up about wrestling, because I feel like wrestling right now is in a process of it changing. And, you know, you talk about guys that have transcended for a long time, like Ric Flair, I feel like it's been I was thinking about this not too long ago, like several years ago, like when he was kind of on his retirement tour the first time. Was the situation of like, I was like, how does this guy still come out and get the big reaction that he's gotten for years, and like, how does he stick around? But yet there were guys that faded away from his generation that people never thought of, and it was like, it's his entrance. Dating back all the way to the 80s, he was coming out with music, he was coming out with a robe, he was a personality, and that will always carry you longer, even as your in-ring skills diminish over time. People still want to see those things, and he can still deliver a great interview. He can still come out and do an entrance. You know, those are those things that people wanted to see out of him from the early point, and he could do that for so long that's why he could do it for so long at such a high level. I always felt like.
And then his life itself, every time things got dull, boom.
In this TMZ world, there's always something with him that's going to pop up for sure.
And so people, got interested in that and got going. I think one of the other things that is going to be terribly interesting in sport is the ability to compete in sport through the use of a machine. And I have a word for that. And I coined this word 20 years ago in a book I wrote. And the word is mechalete. A mechalete is an athlete that uses a machine to compete. Technically, the first mechalete was a race driver. Mm-hmm. He uses a machine to compete in the event. And so I was fascinated by the original movie, Rollerball, which had James Caan in it, and was a different type of sport. And a lot of people laughed about it. I didn't laugh about it because I thought, really, it's something people would pay admission to go see in the U.S. And if you thought long enough, they would pay big time dollars to go see it. Now, I think that you look back at some of the crazy promotions in sport, and you look at Billie Jean King, the first woman to play a man, in a big tennis match. Well, that's always fascinating, and and we're going to see more of that.
Oh, I totally agree. I'm waiting for the day where we see just even female MMA fighters taking on men fighters.
Yeah.
I think that's going to happen. I think they're going to start doing stuff as far as weight class. You're going to see a smaller guy fight a bigger guy.
Oh, yeah.
I think
Now,
that's
now
on
what
the
I
horizon.
did is when Dick Eberhart, God bless him, and your buddy Vince McMahon started the XFL. I got Dick. I said, Dick, that ain't going to work. It's not going to work. Oh, what do you mean it's not going to work? I said, it's just another version of football. I said, what you need to do is do two things and it'll work. All right, what? I said, at all times on the field, each team must have one female. Okay, well, he's sitting down. I said, now, you want a martini or you want a tequila? Because the second one's worse. I said, well, my God, you're going to get somebody killed? I said, no, you won't. The woman is going to be a wide receiver on defense, on offense, and on defense, you're going to have a woman covering her. So, okay. And besides, some of these 160-pound women athletes, I don't want to get hit by them. Now that 175-pound guy might hurt a little worse, but how much worse?
Yeah, that's the question. It's like I always bring that up with. There's a lot of intergender wrestling, like pro wrestling, going on, and people are like, "Wow, that really shouldn't be." But I was like, "But no, there are some very good 140, 150, 160 pound women, and I wrestle guys that are 150, 160 pound.
Really tough.
How is that any different?" Any more or less believable. That's always my point.
Well, and it's not, and you start thinking, you want to get hit by Ronda Rousey? I mean,
exactly.
That's even though she's 118 pounds. But you go a step further, and I said, wait a minute, now I'm not through. He says, what else would you do? I said, I would make it absolutely mandatory that there be a 300-pound running back in the backfield at all times on offense. We bring the refrigerator back. Nothing in pro football got the public steamed up as much as the refrigerator. Because you knew when he was getting down there at that goal line, all 300 pounds of him was going to be hitting that line. And he was scoring. That was the fun part. I happen to know him. He's pretty funny, and his brother. But at any rate, I said, he said, my gosh. He said, well, you'd slow the game down. I said, I said, let me tell you what would happen. Some cat is going to come out of Kazakhstan that's about 6'9" and is about 420 pounds, and he's going to hit that line, and those poor little 300-pound tackles better move out of the way because he's going to bust their rear ends when he hits the back of them. And, you think about that, people would have watched it because it's crazy.
Yeah, and even if he gets in the open field, how's that, defensive back going to take him down?
There's no way.
And just the drama of that.
It's a monkey. It's a monkey climbing up on his, his top. But I saw a 6'8", 302-pound guy with a 37-inch waist. I saw him run a 4.5.
That's it right there. That's
never
the
got in the NFL.
Yeah, and see those guys because it doesn't fit the mold. It's not the prototype. We want to make you more of a linebacker or whatever.
Yeah.
But having to do that changed the evolution of the game, and that's something that's happened just even in pro football. Is you get these bigger athletes that run, and that's how it changes. But you need those innovations to make it different.
You got to have them. So, I start thinking, okay, what you're it's like this midget. This dwarf we got racing, Rico Abreu. I was just talking to a guy yesterday that knows him real well. And I said, I've met him, but I want to find out a little bit more about him. And he said, no, that guy's a racer. There's no question about him being a racer. There is none. He's got fire and brimstone in him. Public loves that stuff. Look, guy about that high walking out, and all of us aren't big, tall. So that kind of hits the spot.
Yeah. I just find it fascinating that you look for these things in other sports. You know what I'm saying? Like this curiosity. I've really enjoyed conversating with you, and I've been very, very guilty, very greedy with your time. We've almost done 2 hours here, and this will probably be a two-parter just because I want to keep all of this because the history, the knowledge, and everything. But before we wrap this all up, I want to get to the one question that I always ask. I always joke around and say that I talk to somebody for about an hour or so, and then I ask this one question.
Yeah.
This is the one thing I want to know about. And with you and everything that you've done, and you being a very smart individual, I'm very intrigued how you answer it. It's a question I ask everybody. Basically, I do this podcast. I talk to people of all walks of life, all varying degrees of success, and I just ask them about success. What is it? How do you define it? Does it have a dollar amount on it? Do you think you can achieve it? Do you feel like you have achieved it? You seem like a person that seems like you have a sense of drive and always curiosity, always pushing towards something. Is that because of success, or is it because of intrigue, or what is it to you? When I say the word success, what does that mean to you?
Well, there's 3 successful people, and there's one I need to talk about first because you need to stay away from them at all costs because they're poison. And that is the person that we would call the person with a narcissistic personality. Narcissus was the god that looked in the water and fell in love with himself because he was seeing his reflection. He could do no wrong ever. He can park anywhere he wants to. He can drive as fast as he wants to. He can treat other people any way he wants to. Now, the really, really successful narcissists are the ones you have to look out for. And that's the ones that can do it in a most manipulative way so nobody ever suspects that they are a narcissist. A narcissist is totally incapable of love. They cannot love anybody. They may have children. They may have had 3 wives or 1 wife, but they are incapable of love because the only thing they love is themselves. Then the second guy or girl is the real promoter that's got a great imagination that knows instinctively what the public wants. And that person has been brought up probably in a small town and has gotten to know what the shoemakers really like, the jewelers really like, the hardware store guy that really, really, really understands humanity and therefore can gear a sport toward those people. And then the third is a very smart person who is more numbers oriented than the rest of us, that can take a really good team and keep it going for a long time. Can take the New York Yankees, for instance, and keep them being the Yankees forever. Now, there's nothing wrong with 2 of the 3. The accountant type, the numbers guy, and the promoter. The one you want to stay away from and avoid and learn about what he is the narcissistic personality, because they are the ones that will get us in the most trouble and eventually poison the sport to the point of no return. We have had a lot of narcissistic personalities in sport, and those are the ones we need to avoid. The promoters, I love them. The accountants, I love them too, because they can keep. It's like my first track I had. My accounting system was, and here I am, a graduate of the University of South Carolina, but accounting was not my forte. I had a chest of drawers. In the top drawer, I had my bills. In the second drawer, I had my money. If I had more in the second drawer than the first, I was doing fine.
Everybody's going to have that system. I got a shoebox.
Yeah, same thing.
If it's in the shoebox, I paid it.
Yeah, same thing.
If it's on the dresser, I still need to pay it.
Yeah.
But do you feel like you have to have a little bit of that first type to be successful?
Of the narcissism?
Yeah.
Well, you see, the true promoter has a little narcissism in him, but
because you have to believe what you're promoting.
Yeah, you believe in what you're promoting, but the difference is the promoter loves people. He really does love people. He loves to bring people along. He loves to make a batter go from 200 to 350. He loves the concessionaire that runs Unit 15 that starts off with nothing and is making enough to buy a $100,000 house now. He loves people. He detests the narcissist. And that's where you see massive battles in sport among the promoters, is the narcissist versus the promoter. Most people won't take enough time to learn how bad the narcissist is, how truly bad.
Wow, that's I definitely I love that answer. Like I can benefit from that myself, and that's kind of what I want. But I can't thank you enough for your time.
Okay.
So much. But you have a live microphone. Is there's anything people probably listen to this, and I know they've enjoyed it. Is there anything that you want to shed your light on, like even a charity, or like go check this out? You have a live microphone to tell people either thank you or hey, make sure you check us out.
I got one thing we end up with. I think that what we all got to do is we got to keep our minds open to change, and change that will make entertainment, which is what sport is, better. If it'll result in another hit in a baseball game, if it'll result in another basket, if it's another exciting moment on the racetrack, if it's an exciting move in wrestling or boxing, then let's bring it in, because change people love, and we got to be open for that. And so many people aren't.
Well, Mr. Wheeler, I can't thank you enough for allowing me in your home and having a conversation. Like I said, I was very greedy with your time, but I'm not getting an opportunity to get down and sit down with somebody as intelligent and just fantastic as yourself. So thank you so much, sir.
You're very, very welcome.
Thank you.